Hello, relatives. This is Warrior Dan with Warrior Evolution Podcast. Welcome to our second episode at Homestead Studios. Big thanks to John Anderson for helping to produce this segment. I'm feeling really amped and a little tired at the same time. I've just come back from helping to coordinate and run the first ever Sober Clean Warrior Weekend, where we invited a number of men in community to come and do some work, share some fellowship, and take a deep dive into personal healing, spirituality, and recovery. And that's really what this podcast is all about. And having discussions in these topics is something I really look forward to. And today I want to introduce a topic that I feel like is underneath a lot of the healing and recovery work that we're talking about. And that's on trauma, and especially about healing men's trauma. And I feel like it's a topic that deserves a lot more attention. So here to help us focus and pull some gold out of that big mine of men's work, I have with me warrior brother and peer of many years. I'd like to welcome David Carr, who is arguably one of the best facilitators in men's work. He specializes in this work in experiential psychodynamic healing with men. David, it's so great to have you join us in this conversation.
Thank you. Great to be here. It was a great weekend you put on.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it very much.
Having you there and having other great men and people ready to step in really made a difference. So thank you for that. And, a big part of what we did, as it came down to it, was this work, right in the heart of a lot of men's work is this stuff that where we go deep and invite men to take off their masks and trust and the work that we're doing and take those risks to heal. And so with that in mind, could you share a little bit about how did you, stumble into men's work, a little bit of your history and what kind of roles and things have you discovered in this?
I've been involved with the Mankind Project for 30 years in men's work, 35. First got involved with Robert Bly here in Minnesota Men's Conference. My story's kind of boring. Midlife crisis, blah, blah, blah. I had a pretty good life that kind of fell apart, and then I put it back together. Got involved with the Mankind Project, the Warrior Training. And
what year was that?
I did the training in 1988. Okay. I began leading them in 1991. And so facilitated hundreds of men. And at the beginning, it's about men's healing and men, after the training, doing some work, they, actually their families reported they were better husbands, better fathers, better friends. They were happier. And but over the course of 30 years, I began to realize that what we were actually doing was healing trauma.
Okay.
That human beings are naturally generous and compassionate and loving if they are adequately resourced and free of, or in most cases healed of, their trauma. Mm-hmm. We all accumulate trauma in our lives, usually growing up. So we can't do much about the adequately resourced part, but we can do something about the healing trauma part. Mm. And that was what was happening with men. As they healed their trauma, they were happier, they were more generous, they were more loving, they were more compassionate, and they were better people, and better family members. And that was just a natural process. Mm-hmm. The key to it was healing trauma.
Mm-hmm. And where do men get this trauma? What we say that? What is in that big
life? Growing up. I mean, nobody has a perfect childhood. Stuff happens, and I make it about me. 'Cause, when I'm 2 or 6 or 3 or whatever, and so I think there's something the matter with me. I experience just normal stuff as traumatic.
This is what a man is going through as he's growing up. He
everybody does.
Yeah, everybody.
Men, woman, everybody. Right. I mean, very few people have a perfect childhood. Now, most of the ills and symptoms of our culture or dysfunctions of our culture are actually symptoms of trauma.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay.
drugs, violence,
Okay.
they're all symptoms of trauma.
Yes.
And the reason we don't get rid of them, we keep treating the symptoms, is we don't touch the underlying trauma. I mean, if you want to stop abuse, battering women, you need to work with the men that are doing the battering. And you can do that. You can get them to stop. But you heal the trauma they've experienced. They were abused, physically abused as children, and they continue that. So healing the trauma is the way to deal with drug addiction, physical violence, virtually all the dysfunctions we see in our culture. And because we don't deal with the underlying trauma, they don't go away.
So here we have these social ills or imbalances that, there's a lot of resources dedicated towards addiction, or there's a lot of attention on, domestic violence, or all these ways that there's the imbalanced behavior and the cost to everyone else. But underneath that, you're saying is trauma.
Yeah. Well, and with all the effort put on that, are we getting any less of it? Is it going away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're having some problems.
No, it's not.
Bouncing back from that stuff.
You help it around the edges, but you're not actually solving the problem because you're not actually dealing with the real cause, which is personal trauma. And trauma comes from lots of sources. A big one, although less common now, is war. We've lost more Vietnam veterans to suicide since the war than we lost killed in action during the war. And the suicide rate among returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan is astronomical. There's a way in which everyone who goes into combat is a casualty. They experience trauma which we as a culture don't know how to relieve them of. Native, indigenous people had better ways to, they sent their young men into battle. They could also bring them back and make them human again.
Through ceremony and ritual.
Yeah. We don't, that's not as available to us. We don't have that.
I'm aware that was a big part of the population that Robert Bly was helping men in that area, right? A lot of the Vietnam vets and what we're learning about that PTSD, and as we're gaining more knowledge in the 80s around that, right? And so how big is that factor today in terms of the military trauma?
Yeah, it's smaller in number, because we had 2,000, 3,000 casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, with 50,000 in Vietnam. But proportionally, it's much higher, because a higher proportion of our veterans were actually in combat in Iraq, because we had contractors doing everything else. So, and it's the being in combat or being around combat and seeing that much death that causes trauma. Like being in a car accident causes trauma. Being in a plane crash causes trauma. It's not unlike that. Trauma it does damage to both the body and the mind. The body keeps score, so you absorb damage in your body. It's physical, and so there's somatic ways to get that out.
Yes.
You also, it damages your psyche, your soul, your whatever you want to call it, your mind. And there are processes to get that out too.
I think most people see trauma as primarily psychological, right? And thus the responses have been, like in the military, right? It's going to be talk therapy or drugs to help balance the mental conditions, and that's where a lot of the responses have been around those.
Well, and that's what indigenous people understand better than we do. They had ceremonies, sweat lodge. You actually did things physically to release the trauma. We probably understand the psychological stuff better, but you need both. The trauma is held in the body, and it's held in the mind, and you need to release both. Ceremony is a way to other psychosomatic work. The psychological work is basically to re-experience the feelings, the emotions that have been bottled up. They're bottled up because they're painful and they're hurtful. So we repress them because they're hurtful. We don't want to, but repressing them is what causes the trauma.
Mm.
It's like creating an infection impacted in your, under the skin.
And it stays there.
Yeah, it's got to be released, or it'll kill you.
Is it fair to call it stored energy, in essence?
Sure. I mean, it's not good energy, but it's stored energy.
Yes. So how does participation in something like Minnesota Men's Conference or Mankind Project and these weekends, based on your experience, help a man to unpack that or resolve that somehow?
Those are ways generally to relieve the psychological trauma. So you are experiencing the grief and the pain in a safe container where men can support you. And generally this seems to work best in a single gender container. Mm-hmm. And so it's experiencing that grief and experiencing that pain, even anger, where it can be held, where you can express things and there won't be any consequences out in the real world. I mean, you get angry, but nobody's going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. You can cry, and nobody's going to think less of you. It's not going to get on your Facebook feed or Instagram or anything. You can do it privately. Mm-hmm. But the expression of these emotions releases them. I mean, feelings just want to be felt, and they'll go away. Yes. But only when they're fully felt. And if they're not fully felt, they're impacted, like an impacted tooth that won't, or an infection, and they're damaging.
And there's a lot of suppression in men's emotional life that is either culturally sanctioned or in family systems or however. How is it that men end up in that situation where they're not able to, on their own, properly deal with that?
Yeah, well, we're taught, we're socialized, we're conditioned. Don't cry, don't show your feelings, be tough, be strong. And so men come to the Mankind Project, come to warrior training, and a lot of what we do we call emotional intelligence, because men don't even know they have feelings. I mean, they come out of the, it's like they come in, their life is black and white, they leave, it's technicolor, because now they've got emotions. And we talk about kind of the four primary emotions, kind of like primary colors, anger, grief, joy / shame is the negative one, or fear. Well, men, anger is a general all-purpose emotion for men. If they're afraid, they cover it with anger. If they're sad, they cover it with anger.
And one that we're allowed to feel, right? Yeah, it's okay to feel anger.
It's okay. And if you're sad, you cover it. And if you're angry, you're angry. So men are, that's what they. So what we do in the warrior training is let them explore all those. We tease them apart. And let them explore where it is in their body, what it feels like. They'll connect with it. So they learn that emotions have energy and information. And you can do something with that.
Interesting.
Energy we need to live, information what causes it. Once you can engage them that way, they're allies. They're not a problem to be suppressed or And most men in the culture looks at emotions as a problem. And wish we didn't have it, and
something to be fixed.
Yeah, something to be fixed, and like body odor or something, But in fact, they're a normal part of life. In fact, without them, life is black and white. With emotions, life is technicolor. So you learn what information they have, how to use the energy they have, but most of all, you learn that if you express them, they go away.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's kind of like somebody delivering a message to your door. They come pounding. You don't answer the door. They're going to pound louder and louder and louder. They're going to pound. Yeah. And finally you open the door and say, "Here's this message." Boom. Wow. Okay. Now they, the emotion having delivered the message, the messenger can go away.
Interesting.
Sometimes we invite them in to live with us.
That could go different ways.
That's not good. But once you've got the information, the messenger can leave. You're done with it. He's done his job.
Yeah.
And so if you answer the door and get the information, the emotions will leave you alone.
How many men are sitting there in lives of desperation? The door's knocking. The energies wants their attention. It's showing up in all kinds of ways in their life, but they're not quite addressing it.
Most of us, I was. I mean, that's what got me to the warrior training. And usually something big and painful, a divorce, a death, a career crisis, something happens that causes enough pain
Right.
that the normal coping mechanisms don't work, and you're looking for something else. And so almost everybody comes to it in that frame of mind.
They've hit an emotional wall.
Yeah.
Or energetic wall, something. Their life isn't working anymore.
Some life crisis, and they're looking for more tools than they already have, and which in many cases is, we've got a lot of cognitive tools. We can do planning, we can do, but most men don't have emotional tools.
So it sounds like a big part of this work is getting men to that place where they get some of those emotional coping skills. They get familiarized with their stuff. But how does that actually help a man to, heal from trauma? Because trauma seems so intense, dealing with, incredible losses, incredible situations where maybe they have a lot of shame or a lot of guilt or something like that.
Yeah, well, there's kind of normal trauma, although a lot of trauma people experience in normal life, if it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, is as serious as trauma people experience in combat. I mean, I think probably most non-organic, most psychological suicides are the result of trauma. So whether it's combat or growing up, it's a two-pronged effect. One, the body, you need to get it out of the body, so there needs to be body work, somatic work. In MKP, we do psychodynamic work. We role play and actually have people express angry, you get to hit a pillow, or express sorrow, you get to cry. You express the feelings that are bottled up, and then that's really where the psychological and the physical, the body, come together, is in the actual expression.
Interesting.
We also see that the involvement of large muscle groups helps release that. So you don't just sit there and talk about it. That's why talking therapy is wonderful, but
limited.
It doesn't touch trauma so well. You need to get the large muscle groups involved. You need to get the body involved. If you can do that, then and I don't pretend to understand why it works or how it works, but I will tell you it does work.
Interesting. What have been like some of the, discoveries as you've been doing this work? And some of us have different versions of how we get to that stuff, right? And so in the Sober Warrior Society, we do an accountability process that allows us to access it. And you have different ways you access shadow or energy and all that stuff. So, but what I've noticed is how powerful some of these things are, and you get this aha, right? Like, just could you describe just any like big surprises or just moments or anything that you could take away from your work, like just what has really impacted you about this work, that in regards to what men are carrying and how it works? Because for me, it's been like a wow sometimes.
No, I can't.
You can't, yeah. It's just too big, or?
It depends on the person.
Yeah.
It's not, what I like to say is it doesn't matter what I cover,
Yeah.
It matters what they uncover.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
The sine qua non, the most important thing, is their willingness to go into their emotions.
I see.
We have men who leave the weekend because they're not willing to do it. And, okay, that's fine. I mean, if you're not willing to do it, not much we can do for you. Or they're kind of not willing, they go through the whole weekend and they're, if you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, you have to be willing to face your pain and your fear and whatever it is that's in there. We call it your shadow. If you're willing to face it, you can come out the other side of it. I mean, the biggest learning is I faced my fear and I come to the other side of it. And it didn't kill me.
Right.
My God, I was afraid, but I'm still alive.
Yeah.
So the first time you're not so sure. After the first time you get, well, I could probably do that again. I didn't die the first time. So,
it wasn't the end of my life and everything.
Yeah. Some people describe what we do as initiation. It's an initiation if men experience it that way.
Yeah.
It can be a transformation, and that transformation involves taking apart my ego. See, my ego thinks it's me, or wants me to believe it's me. It convinces me that it's me.
Oh, so all the self-survival mechanisms, right?
Exactly.
Because of course you preserve your own life, right?
All this, 90% of what's going on is to keep this body alive.
Absolutely.
So if my ego convinces me it's me, I'll bring all that online to keep my ego.
Resistance then.
Yeah.
Right, to defend.
But, so what we do on the weekend and what most initiations do is take the ego apart.
Wow.
And that feels like death. The first time you do that, it feels like death. And you're kicking and screaming. You do not want to do that. Right. But if you do that, you go to hell for a day or two.
Well, that happens. You risk death, and you feel it, right?
But then you come back, and you put your ego back together, and it's amazing. Now your ego is more complex. It's larger. It's like you had a house with the fence real close. You tore down that fence, you put the fence further out. So now you got a bigger yard.
Interesting. You have to erase the old boundary to make a bigger territory.
Right. And the old boundary is the ego. And now you have ego 2.0 that's more complex, larger, and that's why you can be more compassionate, more generous, more loving. There's more of you to do that.
And you have access to all that you're feeling in there.
Well, you have access to stuff that you didn't think was you. It's like, the fence is further out, so now I got more in my yard. Stuff that you didn't think was you now own as you, and that gives you, and a lot of that is stuff you don't want to identify with because it's negative or there's judgments about it. That's the going to hell part.
The ownership that some of the stuff that's been down and dirty in my life is actually me doing it or creating it.
Right. It's not somebody else's doing, it's my doing. We call that shadow, what I hide, repress, and deny.
Say one more time. Shadow is?
Shadow is what I hide, repress, or deny.
Okay.
So I hide it, I'm not going to show you. I repress it, we're not going to let that out. Or I deny it, that's not me. That's not me. When I go, oh yeah, that's me. Okay, I'll stop hiding that. I'll let it out, give it a little airtime, and I'll stop pretending it's not me. What's amazing is the amount of energy that gives you in your life, and the amount of peace that gives you in your life. Because all this energy, it's like trying to hold these ping pong balls underwater.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy. If you just let them come up.
And the ego's not telling you that that's what you're going to get for doing this. The ego's like gloom and doom and fright, and the world's going to fall apart.
So you can go through this process more than once. The transformation. Traditional peoples would go, there was the first initiation from boyhood to manhood, which is kind of warrior, and then to marriageable adult, husband, you learn to love somebody beside yourself. And then father, you learn to love little people that don't actually love you back. And then kind of householder, you learn to love other kids besides your kids. And then kind of elder, you learn to love all of it. Kids who don't look like your kids.
Yes.
And then eventually you learn to love the rocks and the trees and the water and the sky and the land.
Well,
because
your heart just opens up
right.
until you can love everything.
Each one of those processes is a death of an ego and a transformation and a rebuilding of a new, larger, more complex ego. And in each one, my experience, I'd say it's universal, is you become more compassionate, more loving, more generous, and a little less attached to yourself.
Yes. I'm really seeing here the value of the warrior in this, because the warrior courage is the one that's needed to, one, erase the old boundary, the courage to go in there, and the second, to create a new one. And to feel, authentic, right, in that new expansion, right, and to keep and to continuously willing to do that, right. It's not something you get to once and done.
No, and that's the risk of talking about warrior training is initiation. Is you think you're done with it. Well, you're not done with it. You're done with it when they put you in the ground.
You're given the tools, and you got to continue.
Right, you got to keep doing the work. But you're right. The warrior. The warrior is willing to take risks and go out and serve the king and queen, but take the risk. And we call our weekend the warrior training because it's about risk. It's about taking that risk and going into the unknown.
And the rewards are things you can hardly even imagine. Well, I see that there's just so much more we could talk about and unpack here, but it's been a really neat dive into this work. And to get to experiencing it with you shoulder to shoulder in these trainings and in these weekends is really a great privilege and honor. So
it's my privilege. I feel honored to be able to serve men in this way.
Wow. Thank you, Brother David. And is there any other thing we can let people know if they want to follow up at any of this material or things that are being offered today?
Mankind Project offers the new warrior training if we ever get through COVID and can get together again in groups. You can go to the mankindproject.org or mkp.org on the website. And we are offering online stuff and in the interim. Mm-hmm. We hope to be offering some smaller scale stuff when that's possible.
Right on.
But
well, we are having some more events at the Sacred Heart Warrior.
Yes.
We're doing another sweat on the 24th, Sunday, and that's going to be to honor just anything that we're letting go of. Seeing it as kind of like not quite a grief ritual, but to honor whatever it is people want to ceremonially release. And that could be grief for a departed one. It could be a transition in their life, making a new brand for themselves, whatever it is. And there's that purification that's offered in there. So we'll have a warrior healing circle to do that, and then a lodge process. So if you can make it or others can make it, it'd be great to see what we can do together. I think our time is up. So thank you, David, and thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for another edition of Warrior Evolution Podcast.